All right, so today we're working on a, I think it's 2004 or 5 Ford Expedition, and what the complaint was I guess it was smoking. The front wheel was smoking, and coming from the brakes. That's pretty common for a caliper that's not releasing, or possibly a brake hose. A lot of people don't know this, but your brake hose can actually collapse and cause the same condition. So anyway, today we're gonna just replace the caliper and the brake hose on it just to cover our bases. It's probably the caliper, but throughout my career I've seen quite a few brake hoses cause the same issue. And sometimes you can kind of find out by opening up your bleeder and trying to press back on the caliper and see if you just got the brake hose and push back and it pushes back, then it's probably the brake hose, and if it doesn't push back, then it's probably the caliper. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and replace both today. Now, a lot of places will they'll say you have to replace both sides. That's kind of up to you and your budget, and you know what you want to do. But there's millions and millions of vehicles in the junkyard with the original calipers, so I normally try to just change what what needs to be changed or fixed. It's not a horrible idea to change out the entire or both calipers. All right, so if someone's done your brakes before and they didn't throw these away, you might have these over the cap where the screw's at. Just go ahead and remove that. You can use that with your fingers, remove it. And then you have a 7mm that should take out these bolts right here. And this bottom one on this one is actually stripped out. Someone has stripped it out and somehow got it in there enough to hold it, but I can't get it out without doing a bunch of surgery on it. So what I'm going to do is just take the whole bracket off and remove it, because the new caliper comes with a bracket. I'll kind of show you, but yeah, I put the the tool all the way in there, bottomed it out, and it's just stripped. So luckily it doesn't really matter, because I believe the new caliper comes with a bracket. So we'll just replace it all at once. So I'm going to go ahead and get the tools, and we'll take this bracket off. And now's the time. I'll probably go ahead, before I do that, I'll go ahead and take this hose off. I believe that's a 14 mil, and then kind of let it drain into the pan a little bit. And you got a couple points right here. There's 10 mil right here, and we'll kind of let that get it loose so it's not in the way. I'm taking the rest of it apart. Make sure you have a pan under it, because you will lose some fluid. Now, I didn't lose that much because I got it clamped off, and there's not much fluid between there and there anyway. So that's 14 mil bolt, hold it to the back of the caliper. So I'm going to kind of set this, just leave it right there, and then we're going to get the two caliper bracket bolts right here. We'll rip those off, and then take a look at that. Alright, you got two 18mm bolts holding the caliper bracket to the spindle here. Go ahead and zip these off. Got one on the top, one on the bottom, and then this whole thing should pull off. Alright, with the brake hose disconnected and the two bolts out, this whole unit here should pop off. And because it's seized on there, it's not wanting to come off, so we get the pry bar here, which is just a big screwdriver. Alright. So this is the back side of it, and you got the bolt there, and bolt there, these two holes. This is what bolts to the spindle there, and keeps brakes up where they're supposed to be. Now, the new caliper comes with a new bracket, so we don't have to reuse that. So I'm going to go ahead and get that ready. I'm going to put that bracket on there, and then I'll rehang the caliper. And the reason I'm going to do that is I'm going to wait until I'm got all this together and ready before I take the brake hose off. I don't believe it's a brake hose issue on this, just because it wouldn't push back just now. We could test that theory, but we're going to go ahead and replace it anyway, and it's just cheap insurance. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and take the put the new bracket on here, and then we'll get the caliper and brake set up, and then the last thing we'll do is change this hose. Then we have to bleed it out, and then I'll change the brakes on the other side, and then we'll go from there. It should be good. But this, you know, in these expeditions they have this vacuum line here that goes down to your axle and goes up. That comes with the new brake hose, so we don't, you know, you can just leave that hooked up and then take it off as one piece. The only thing that's going to get in the way a little bit is your speed sensor. That comes out of the brackets, and then just snake it out. So anyway, I'm going to get the new bracket set up, and then we'll put that on and start putting these. Alright, anytime you're doing brake jobs, it's a good idea to take your rotors off and clean the rust out behind the rotors, like this. Any kind of rust back there can cause vibration, especially getting off the highway or whatever. I just lightly go over it with a 3M brush or roll-lock wheel. It's good practice to get into. Clean up the bearing face here, or the hub face, and clean up the inside of the rotor, and that way keep the vibrations and all that kind of stuff at bay. You'd be surprised what a little bit of rust can do behind here can cause to your brake pedal. So now we're going to go ahead and install this caliper bracket, and you got the two 19mm or 18mm bolts. We're just going to start those and run down with the impact. Got my gloves on because I don't want to catch the caliper virus. It's a very serious virus to catch. So once we get this back on, we'll put the brakes on and get the caliper back on, and then we're ready to put this hose on and bleed it real quick. Alright. So the new caliper comes with new bolt for the brake hose with the washers. We don't need that because the new hose comes with it also. And it does come with the new brake pin, caliper pins to bolt it on. So you're set up with all that good stuff. And like I said before, it's always a good idea if you have something like this to go ahead and change the brake pads on both sides. So I'm going to get the brake pads set up on here and get it all set up, and then we'll... Alright, once you get the caliper back on, don't forget to put the spring back in, the brake pad. It goes down in here and then hooks into your caliper. The caliper came with a brand new one, so I just used that one instead of the old one. Also, don't forget to put this thing in out here on outside the brakes. Again, the caliper came with a new one, so we're just using that. So I got these basically are the old ones. So now we're just going to go for this brake hose, and that is a 13 mil. So use a flare nut wrench to get it started and break it loose with that, so you don't round it off. And then once you get it started, you can go ahead and just use a regular wrench. And I'm going to go ahead and break this loose right here, which is the bracket holding it on, just so I can switch this out as fast as I need to. I mean, it's not going to come flooring out of there at 100 miles an hour, but I just like to get everything ready so I can switch it out and block off the new one. And then I don't have to worry about losing all the fluid out of the master cylinder. So it's 10 mil holding on to the frame here. take that loose until you get the actual brake line loose. You see I'm starting to lose a little bit of fluid already. So it's almost off, so I'm just going to grab the new hose real quick and get it up there so that it's ready. And you're just going to start the new hose finger tight. Hey! Sorry about that dog. And we're going to pull the clamp off of this hose and put it on the new hose, just so we don't lose all the fluid now that the new hose is connected. You're just clamping it down until it stops. You don't have to just cutting the fluid off through the hose. If you're in a pinch, you could use some channel lock needle nose and put some rubber hose over them, and that'll work too. I wouldn't recommend putting the channel locks directly on the hose though, without something protecting the hose. So I'm going to go ahead and start this bracket back in the right spot, and then we'll tighten the hose down. And all I have left is to bleed it. I use a power bleeder, but I'll tell you, I'll kind of go over the bleeding process if you don't have one. And we'll get this finger tight and snug, and then the last little bit we'll use a flare nut wrench, again so we don't round it off. And you want them pretty snug, but you don't want to go ballistic on it. All right, so I got to run the little vacuum hose, and we'll put this back up here, and then we'll bolt it back to the caliper, and then we'll go over the bleeding. We'll go over the bleeding process. All right, once you tighten that with the flare nut wrench, it's nice and snug. You got the 10mm here for the bracket. You have the air hose. Just go ahead and run that back up through this protector here. Plug it back in. If you forget where it plugs in at, just look and see where the lines are on the top, and just match them up to the bottom. You have a thick line, a bigger line, and a smaller line, and those run down here into by the bearing. Then you have your hose, obviously, that comes across, and you got one bracket here, 10mm. Then that goes down into your caliper. Now on this bolt here, there's two washers. You got one on the inside, one on one side of the brake line, and one on the other. Go ahead and tighten that down. Torque it pretty tight, but don't go too crazy on that, because if you tighten this super tight, they'll snap off in the caliper. They're not the kind of bolt where you you know, put a 1/2 inch ratchet on and crank away at. Just use a 3/8 ratchet, and I mean, you want it tight because you don't want fluid leaking out of here. So I always tighten it up pretty good, and then I drive it and come back and double check that just to make sure. I actually double check that, and I double check the one up here just to make sure it's not leaking. So here's your bleeder valve on the caliper. There's two ways you can do it. I have a power bleeder. I just stick a hose onto this and hit a button, and it sucks it out. And then once the fluid is coming through here with no bubbles, then it's good to go, and you close it back up. If you don't have access to that, the next thing you can do is an old school way, and I would do this first regardless. You know, some people will say you got to bleed the whole brake system, which is fine, but do the one that you took apart first, and then go back, and then come back and do this, you know, because what they want you to do on most cars, start at the passenger rear, then go to the driver's rear, then go to the passenger front, and then the driver's front will be the last one you would bleed. But since we put this caliper and hose on, I'm going to bleed this one first, and then I'll go ahead and bleed the back to the passenger side front, and then come back to this third, just so I don't pull any air back through the system with the power bleeder from this caliper. So I'm going to go ahead and bleed this one first. And if you don't have a bleeder, have someone, what you do is you have this closed, have it ready to be opened, have someone get in, pump it 4 to 5 times, have them hold the pedal. You'll open this up. It's good to have a pan or a hose on it to direct the brake fluid into a pan. You'll open this up and air and fluid should spit out of it. You close it, have them do it again, and do that 3 or 4 times, and make sure they don't let off the pedal while this is open. If they let off the pedal when it's open, they'll suck air back in it. So when you tell them, after they pump it 4 or 5 times, tell them to stop, open this up, let it push all the air and fluid out, close it back up, and then they can let their foot off the pedal. If they let it off before you close this, they're just going to suck air back in the system. So that's how you do it manually. So anyway, I don't know how helpful this video was. I just kind of wanted to show you a good way of not losing all your fluid when you're changing the caliper out. It's pretty self-explanatory. But I always, like I said, I clamp off this line with one of those line clamps, and that prevents the master cylinder from going completely dry, which you don't want. And it makes it much easier to bleed it afterwards. With this, technically all you have to do is just bleed this corner right here and it should be good, but I'll go ahead and bleed the other 3 just to make sure. And that's pretty much it for a caliper and brake hose on a 04 Ford Expedition. It's pretty much the same for almost every car, especially older cars. And I guess that's about it. I don't know what else to add to this. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them down below, or